Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams with me on this Tuesday afternoon. And who boy, a lot to get into to start this week. I think it's pretty important to go ahead and timestamp when we're recording this. It's a little bit after noon Eastern time on Tuesday. I say that because there's a lot of transfer portal news, a lot of NFL draft news. Some we're going to cover on this episode, but I have no doubt that there's going to be more as this week goes on, as some Georgia targets in the portal decide where they're going, as some Georgia players who are in the portal decide where they're going, and then for several current Georgia Bulldogs as they determine if they're going to come back to Georgia for the 2025 season or if they decide to go pro. So we're going to talk a lot about the portal. We're going to talk a lot about the draft decisions that have already been made, and we'll keep an eye out as we're recording this in case there's more news. And we'll also talk about UGA hoops toward the end of this. Tough start to SEC play on Saturday, and they've got a big test on Tuesday night in Stegman Coliseum. But Kipp, I want to set you up. You were not on the post-game podcast that we had after the Sugar Bowl, that 23-10 loss to Notre Dame. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that game. What sort of stood out to you in that moment, and maybe anything that stuck with you in the days since that loss?
Yeah, I think I've had time to do some self-scouting since that game, and the one thing I kind of realized, I think we all realized, is that the signs were there for this Georgia team was not just a flawed one, but one where the margin for error was smaller because of all of the self-imposed mistakes. And this team, we talked about how the mantra was resilience and overcoming adversity, but I don't think we gave enough credence to the fact that most of this was self-inflicted. And I think we found that out Thursday afternoon, that Georgia was a heavily flawed team that did not have what it took to overcome adversity against a pretty good team in Notre Dame, and one that Ben mentioned on the post-game pod, on the preview pod, on the playoff seeding pod, that Georgia's bracket is a little bit more difficult than what people are giving credit for, and that this Notre Dame team needs to be taken seriously. And now we know that a solid team that doesn't make mistakes can beat a heavily flawed, albeit maybe more talented Georgia team. I don't think this is a situation where you look at it at the Georgia program and wonder which direction is this program going. I think ultimately you look at it and go, this is a team that won the SC championship, that had 3 top 10 wins, and still had a chance to win with a backup quarterback who had never started a game in his career. And I think that there's been, again, a lot of reactions, obviously, from Georgia fans, because they didn't expect their season to end this early. And that's fair. Those are the expectations you should have, whether you're playing your starting quarterback or your backup quarterback. So overall, you can look at this season and say, by Georgia standards, it was not a success. I think the real question is, do you think this Georgia team underachieved, or were they just a team that we thought too much of going into the year? I mean, I think looking at the schedule, everyone assumed Georgia's not going to go undefeated, and they didn't. They lost a couple games on the road, but you still couldn't figure out, what this Georgia team's identity is. And I think when you look at the stats, the fact that a lot of numbers stand out, the rushing attack being the worst, it's been at Georgia since, you were a toddler, basically. I think that is an aspect where you can say this Georgia team on the offensive line in the ground game definitely underachieved. And that's one aspect. If you're Georgia and you're Kirby Smart, you look at this program, you go, this is where we need to improve. Offensively, we have to be able to run the football. We're not going to lead the country in drops every season. That was a blip on the radar, but this run game has to be fixed moving into the offseason.
Timothy on YouTube said kickoff return was brutal. I mean, that's where the game was swung, was on the Gunnar Stockton fumble that leads to the touchdown. And then the kick return to start the third quarter. I mean, Georgia was just playing from behind and never could get back into it. Kip, you used a word that I used when I wrote my column after the game, and flawed. I mean, it was a flawed team, and you kept seeing them overcome those flaws. But nobody wanted to see Georgia's season end the way it did. But I wrote about this. It was kind of fitting. I mean, you had a huge drop in the Dylan Bell play. You had the run game struggling to get going. I mean, we've seen some of these issues again and again. As that game wore on, tackling was really an issue for the Georgia defense, especially with Riley Leonard. There were a lot of the symptoms we saw throughout this season that popped up in big moments for Georgia. I haven't gone back and rewatched the entire game, but I did sit and watch some of the highlights, probably about a 15, 20-minute highlight reel this morning. And things that stood out to me. I was impressed with Gunnar Stockton. I thought he played pretty well. I thought Ben hit the nail on the head in the postgame saying, if I read you these stats that Gunnar had, his final stats, I would have thought Georgia would have won the game. And I agree. I mean, that fumble doesn't show up, in his passing stat line, but he didn't throw any interceptions, which I expected he'd throw at least one, given the situation. Thought he had great zip on the ball. He had a play that I don't think I pointed out in the postgame pod where he hit Dylan Bell on a comeback route. I mean, it was just right where it had to be. It was the play that Dylan winds up stepping out of bounds and might have cost himself, 10, 15 extra yards, but still a really good catch. Gunnar had a strike across the middle to Dylan, had the ball to Dylan that Dylan wasn't able to catch. I thought the throw to Arian Smith was right on the money. Another good throw, strong throw on that Cash Jones touchdown. So I thought Gunnar played well. Thought his offensive line let him down. Monroe Freeling, I think you saw his inexperience. He really struggled at left tackle, so much so that they started getting creative and at one point put Xavier Truss over there trying to just get that line solidified. The biggest thing in the rewatch, Riley Leonard deserves a lot of credit. I really don't know how much we talked about him in the post game, but one of Notre Dame's first explosive plays is a keeper where it's supposed to be a counter to the left. Well, he sees a hole right up the middle and is like, all right, I'm just going to take it up the middle. And he takes off and had some big runs late where I thought you could tell Georgia's defense was kind of worn down. There were some third down runs where one specifically where he took off to the left and kind of dives over Malachi to move the chains. I mean, I thought Riley, you look at his stats, they weren't crazy. I think he only ran for maybe 90 rushing yards, but he did an outstanding job against Georgia and made the plays they had to have. And the only other thing I think I've got, Kip, is you look at the drive charts specifically for Georgia late, and you end the game with 3 consecutive turnovers on down. You're just not going to win games when you don't finish drives. And it got to a point because of that fumble before halftime, because of the kick return after halftime, that they couldn't just trot Peyton Woodring out there. They had to have touchdowns, and they moved the ball decently well. But when you get in those positions, you have to have touchdowns, and they struggle to do that.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a program that has won back-to-back national championships. There are players on the field that were part of those teams, played important roles in those teams. This should have been the more disciplined team on the field because these are the guys that have been there before. And Notre Dame was the team that was trying to make a name for itself as a team that has not done well in the playoff. And it was Georgia making mistake after mistake. And you look back on this and you do wonder, this defense underachieved. We are talking about guys that have declared for the NFL draft that we're going to be talking about that are going to be first round picks, 3 of them, including the best linebacker in the country. And the impact in this game, it just wasn't there. I mean, for Malachi Starks, for Mikel Williams, even for Jalen Walker, they did not play up to the standard at Georgia in this game. And again, you do give credit to Riley Leonard, but the talent on Georgia's defense, it was just at each layer of their defense, they had guys that should have been able to step up and make game-changing plays, and they were not able to do that. So that equity that Kirby Smart's built, you have to remember now it's not infallible. They're not going to win a national championship every year, but I just think you can't lock in his defense right now as being elite every year. We had done that because we said, listen, they're going to have a great defense every year under Kirby Smart, but I don't think you could say that about this year's defense. And honestly, I'm not really sure what this team was elite at, except, attempting to overcome their own mistakes, which again caught up to them in the playoff. But you can't really look at anything on this Georgia team and say they were elite in this aspect, except maybe the kicking game. And unfortunately, one of their kickers wasn't able to even play this game, and Brett Thorson and Drew Miller did an admirable job in his first game. But just looking back on this season, it's tough to put this kind of a label on it, but I would say that this team probably did underachieve overall just based on the talent level they had on the roster.
No, I think it's totally fair, especially as we start talking about NFL draft, and those guys. There's going to be multiple guys who are first round picks, especially on this defense. And how do you not say they underachieved when you've got NFL teams clamoring for those guys? I did want to mention this, Kip, because you mentioned Kirby Smart, and I meant to mention this at the top. We do want to send our condolences to Kirby Smart and his family. Sonny Smart, Kirby's father, passed away Saturday, 76 years old. Just an absolutely heartbreaking situation where Sonny hurt his hip down in New Orleans. I think that was New Year's Eve. Winds up having hip surgery. There's complications, and he passes away. So I did want to pass that along because obviously a super sad situation. And again, my heart goes out to Kirby because there is a lot going on right now. I can't imagine trying to balance everything going on with his football program in addition to losing a parent. And as Kirby's talked about quite a bit, he and his father were really, really close. So did want to send my condolences there.
Yeah, that pregame interview he did with ESPN that Kirby did, you could see it in his face. And I don't even know how he coached in that football game, but when you look back and you think about, the criticism that he faced for the decisions, having Gunnar Stockton, throw that ball right before halftime, some other decisions that were made. I give him a complete pass on this because I don't even know how he was there on the sidelines, other than the fact that he knew that's exactly where Sonny would have wanted him to be. And that's kind of where my mind went with that whenever I just tried to process how that week was for Kirby, how he was trying to stay focused and keep his team together when he was thinking about, someone that's just been such a huge impact in his life as Sonny was. And, just that coaching aspect, the fact that, Sonny coached him at Bainbridge and just that aspect of their life, which is such an important part that I think that's exactly where Kirby's mind was, that he owed this to his team and he knew that's exactly where his father wanted him to be. But me personally, I would not have been able to hold the composure card for 1 second of that game. So I do give credit to Kirby for, putting his team first. But also, yeah, I'm thinking about him right now as he's having to navigate all of his players making decisions on their future while trying to, prepare this program for 2025. So cannot imagine what that would be like. But at the same time, I know that he's doing exactly what his father would have wanted him to do right now.
I did want to plug just on X, Jeremy Green, a high school coach at Jeremy D_Green. I would encourage y'all to go look at the tweet he had about Sonny Smart. This is back from when Jeremy was a young high school coach, because I didn't know Sonny Smart at all, but to me it kind of spoke to the kind of guy Sonny was. It's a really great story there. Well, Kip, there's been a lot going on with the transfer portal, and let's start there. And let's start with what Georgia's added. Georgia came out of that Sugar Bowl loss having not added anybody from the transfer portal. And as we record on Monday, they have now added 3 people. It started on Sunday with Zachariah Branch and Zion Branch from USC, and then it picked back up on Tuesday with Miami safety Jaden Harris. Let's start with the Branch brothers, and I'll throw it to you first, Kip. What do you think of those additions? Georgia coming into the portal season, needing a receiver, needing a safety, and they go out and they get Zachariah Branch to help fill the need at receiver, and they get Zion Branch to fill the need at safety. What do you think of those additions?
I mean, we all knew that wide receiver was going to be the position Georgia made sure that they did everything they could to get some help at. The wide receiver class out of high school, outstanding group, possibly the most talented from top to bottom, 5 guys that should help their program. That being said, again, if you lead the country in drops, then you're going to want to, improve that position room. And Zachariah Branch should bring explosiveness to this offense. And that was something that Georgia forced. I mean, Arian Smith is the first wide receiver under Kirby Smart to have 800 yards in a season. And credit to him for coming back and working hard every single day. But that was a situation where he got that stat by default because they threw him the ball a lot. And they knew that he was the one guy that could get consistent separation. So getting a guy like Zachariah Branch who can do that, but be a little bit more consistent with the football, that's huge for Georgia. This is a difference maker. He's a guy that you can play in the slot, you can move around, you can get him open in space. And I think it's a little bit more of a natural fit, not just for screens, before everyone thinks that Georgia's going to continue to spam the screens and we're going to have a screen counter in the first half that hits double digits, but also, again, jet sweeps, downfield shots. And we know by default, there's also a need in the punt returner because, that Georgia's punt returner is also entering the portal in Anthony Evans. So it fills a strong need there. It's a strong fit. It's a guy that Georgia already had connections with. And that, again, I think he was probably the most talented wide receiver available in the portal that Georgia could get. It's someone that we had connected Georgia with for a while. And, it went so long where Georgia fans had already, given up on being able to land him from the portal because other teams were still trying to get him on campus. But this is a portal win for Georgia. So that narrative for the offseason can go ahead and be, put to rest because I think this was as big of a win as you can hope for Georgia.
Yeah, Zachariah Branch, I wrote a VIP story on Monday just about what stands out about his game. I talked to Ben because he was a little bit more familiar with him than I was, and I thought Ben had the perfect descriptor in dynamic, that Zachariah Branch is a dynamic receiver. Really liked what I saw. I think he's a guy that's going to fill that spot that Dominic Lovett played in that slot. 5'10", 175, a guy that, as Kipp mentioned, I think he'll probably be the top option as far as being a returner for Georgia in the 2025 season. He's a guy that was a freshman All-American in 2023 because of his return skills at USC. Was impressed with his catching ability because, I'd say a lot of the highlights I saw were catching the ball and then yards after catch and him taking off and him finding room to move. But thought he did a really good job with the throws I saw in traffic. Some nice sliding catches, a couple of plays where he went up to get the ball. I really like the addition. And then, to boot, getting Zion Branch. I mean, this is a guy that, I think 6'2", 205, a guy that you add to this secondary. And, we'll talk about Jaden Harris in a minute here, Kip. But I think that Georgia's done a good job of just getting other options for the secondary. I don't know that you could write in Zion Branch or Jaden Harris with a Sharpie and say these guys are going to start, but they are quality options, and you're going to have a whole off season to get these guys in, to get them settled in, and let them compete for it. And I think sometimes people lose sight of, there were some people I know with Jaden Harris that were sort of wondering why Georgia went and got this. This is a guy that was a starter for a really good Miami team, and you're talking about a situation where Georgia obviously has to fill the starting spots that Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson filled, but I mean, they lost some reserves too. They lost Jake Pope, who transferred to UNLV on Monday, and they lost Justin Rhett. I mean, so there is depth that has to be replaced. Now, these guys are going to come in here with the opportunity to start, but at the very least, you have to fill that depth. And again, at the very least, that's what Zion Branch brings. I think being able to bring both of these Branch brothers in, I think it's a big win for Georgia.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this was just immediately when we started looking to the portal and saw that, those guys were available. It just made a lot of sense. I mean, Georgia needed guys at those positions and got two guys that have a lot of talent. And yeah, you talked about that safety position. I mean, they are looking for help in the secondary and still looking for help and hoping to add more guys. So that tells you that is, a position where they know that they need depth at. And I think Zion Branch, we know we can pencil in one guy as a starting safety right now, and that's KJ Bolden. You kind of think you have a guy and Aguero who, when healthy, can help you at the star position and be a starter for you, but you can't lock that in. You can only just kind of project that he's the returning guy with experience there, but you still want to push him as well. So I just think that Zion Branch is a guy that you can come in and see how he does in the spring and go from there. And that's really what Georgia's trying to do now is get some numbers at the position, guys who have played college football and guys that they can bring in and provide depth and potentially start if they impress in the spring.
Another safety they brought in on Tuesday, trying to keep up with my days here, Kip. Jaden Harris, 6 foot, 195, from Atlanta originally. Guy that played in the Miami secondary, 40 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 pass breakups, 1.5 sacks, and interception. His pro football focus numbers weren't great, had some tackling issues this year in a Hurricane secondary that struggled at times. I do know a lot of folks were excited when they saw those numbers from that season opener against Florida. 7 tackles, half a sack, an interception in Miami's big win. I think this kind of falls in the same category to me, Kip, as getting Zion Branch. You get in an experienced guy. You're not locking yourself into him starting. He's going to get an opportunity to prove himself and to go show what he's capable of. But, as we just went over some of these numbers, definitely areas he has to improve on if he's going to play a big role for the Georgia defense in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Dan Jackson, and I like that comparison. A guy that played a lot of football at Georgia, a lot of snaps. And that's what Kirby Smart could depend on with Dan Jackson is that he's going to be out there, as long as Kirby needs him to be out there to do whatever he needs him to do. And yeah, I saw the grades and the missed tackle stats. I also just know that they asked Jaden Harris to play over 50 snaps a game last season. And availability is a trait. But at the same time, we saw what happened to Georgia's defense when it had to stay on the field for a long time, and tackling late in the game suffers. So I don't know what his first half tackle stats are, but who's to say that they're not better whenever he's fresh and in a situation where he can rotate in. But knowing that he has 2 years left to play, knowing that coming in, I think he compares well to what Dan Jackson brought to the program. That's a no-brainer for me. Just looking at that safety position and knowing that, sure, Ja'Cory Thomas seems like he should be ready to step up and play a bigger role for Georgia, but do we know? No. You want competition in the spring. That's what you want. That's what this portal window is for, is to get your team best positioned so you can find out what you have in the spring. And as I said before, Georgia's not even done there. As of now, we record this podcast at 12:30 Eastern time on Tuesday. Adrian Maddox has yet to sign with Florida. That's a situation where Georgia is still, communicating with him from what I know, and a guy that again has ties to Georgia, a guy from Conyers, Georgia, that again Georgia likes a lot, has experience. They're obviously still trying to work on him, and they would bring him in, no questions asked, if they can. And they're still looking for other help, and I expect them to have other DBs in town this week. So they're still attacking the portal, trying to help that secondary, and that tells you that they want more depth there. But I do think, adding Jaden Harris, a guy that, again, a full-time starter at a Power 4 program, this feels like an easy decision. We saw them bring in DBs last year that came nowhere close to seeing the field at their former programs, and they didn't make an impact. I think Jaden Harris will be a guy who can help Georgia in 2025.
Yeah, going to be fascinating to see what Georgia does with who is still left in the transfer portal. Another guy they had reached out to, Ethan O'Connor. I think he wound up at Miami. Be fascinating to see if they go after a corner. Be fascinating to see if they try to get some help on the interior offensive line. We're going to talk about this after the break, but some of the guys they're losing to the NFL. TJ Shanahan's a name that has come up. Texas A&M, a guy that Georgia recruited out of high school. So we'll see what happens there. And would be remiss not to mention Noah Thomas, the 6'6" receiver from Texas A&M, continuing to be a lot of smoke about Georgia here. I think Georgia leads in this recruitment right now. But as we saw with Dane Key earlier during this transfer cycle, it's not over till it's over. So we'll have to keep an eye on it and see what happens. Before we get into some of the guys that Georgia has lost, Kipp, any other positions you're kind of watching for, anyone else of interest that you're keeping an eye on as far as the portal goes?
Well, without trying to give away too much on what Georgia's lost, I'll say that probably a pass rusher would be something that Georgia would be scanning the transfer portal right now to see if there's anyone there that can make an impact. I think that's something where they would want to move quickly on, because those are the guys that, again, everyone's after D linemen and definitely edge rushers. So I think Georgia will evaluate that position very aggressively and see if they can get someone in town this week if possible.
All right, let's talk about some of the guys that Georgia has lost or looks likely to lose, I guess we could say, when it comes to the portal since Thursday's Sugar Bowl. Anthony Evans, the punt returner receiver, has gone in. Jaden Rashada, the quarterback, has gone in. Then the biggest one by far so far, Damon Wilson, the outside linebacker, entering the portal. That one caught me by surprise. I thought that he was a guy that was poised to play a whole lot more with Chaz Chambliss moving on. I think this is a situation, I should say, where you've got Damon maybe wanting to go play in a defense where he's going to be highlighted a little bit more, where he'll have a bigger opportunity to make plays. I will say this on that front, as good as Georgia's outside linebackers have been under Kirby Smart, usually those inside guys that are making more plays, that are kind of having those stats. So from what I gather, I think that's kind of feeding into this. I saw that Chris Hummer and Matt Zenitz reported on Tuesday, Ohio State, who was actually the team that finished runner-up for Damon Wilson out of high school, is leading there. What are your thoughts on these three guys that are leaving Georgia, and probably biggest of all, Damon Wilson, the fact that he may be on his way out?
I think it's fascinating that we are hearing Damon Wilson wants to be in a system that utilizes him better, and he's departing a program that had at his position the number one overall pick in the draft, and what we now assume will be a first round pick in Michael Williams. You have, again, Travon Walker, Michael Williams did not put up big stats at Georgia. And then you look at that position room heading into next season, and right now you go, I mean, that is as friendly of a position room, and no offense to any of those guys in there, because Georgia expects a lot from those guys. But as far as heading into the spring, you're not going to find a friendlier depth chart than what Georgia has at outside linebacker right now. They have 4 guys. 5 if you think Gabe Harris spends time there as well, because he kind of bounces back and forth. similar to what Michael Williams did. But as far as guys that are going to spend, a lot of time there, you got 4 guys, but even then, we saw Isaiah Gibson. That's a big kid. He might be the one who's playing defensive end. They might bring Gabe Harris full time over the outside linebacker. Still, 4 guys. That's a thin depth chart there. That was a huge surprise. I can't imagine that's one that Georgia expected, or they would have, again, already been pursuing that position heavily. That's how quickly these things change after the last snap is played on the season. I mean, I'm sure every player on the roster's DMs are full of people who represent, whatever school, telling them, this opportunity is there for you. But I'm sure we will see what happens, where Damon Wilson lands. Don't expect it to be Georgia, whether it's Ohio State. I know Missouri was getting involved immediately there as well. And Ohio State's had, again, big draft production, and they have a couple of defensive ends who should be second-round picks, I think, in the next draft. But at that position, sure, Georgia's had inside linebackers put up big numbers, but they still, the thing that I think most players think about is that NFL draft and the NFL contract. I don't think Georgia's had an issue there at all. And so there's a very surprising decision by him. But, I mean, we're good for one of those in offseason, right? You're going to have one guy either head to the draft or head to the portal. In Georgia's case, maybe both. And so they're having to completely turn this roster over, and that position room is going to look completely different next season.
Significant loss if that is how this plays out. And as Kipp said, I do anticipate that Damon's not going to be back at Georgia for 2025. Just quickly on the other 2, Anthony Evans, a guy that never really broke in with the receivers. I guess, Kipp, there's kind of this like punt returner curse for Georgia now, because that's 2 straight off seasons that the punt returner has left after Mekhi Muse wound up transferring to Houston. A lot of Georgia fans weren't all that torn up about Anthony leaving after really a poor blocking attempt on, I think that was the play that Trevor Etienne fumbled. But, I think he is a really talented guy. He's still a young receiver. Will be fascinating to see where he ends up. I want to say he's from Texas, so maybe he heads out back to Lone Star State. And then Jaden Rashada, I thought the writing was on the wall once it became clear in the pregame of the Sugar Bowl that Ryan Puglisi was the second-team quarterback, that it would have been Ryan. And that was even mentioned after the SEC championship game when Gunner had to come out, that Puglisi would have been up. I've seen, I think it was Zenitz and Chris Hummer reporting that UCLA has shown early interest. So Jaden Rashada going to have a chance. I think he's going to try to go somewhere where he can start. I think he's capable. He wasn't really in Georgia's plans going forward. And so he's on the move again.
We never really, heard a peep about him during the season. I mean, there's never a point where you thought that he was pushing Gunnar Stockton for the backup job during the regular season. So I think we kind of saw, where this was heading. And, we were told, again, came in late and didn't get the playbook down in time. But at the same time, you thought maybe he would push Gunnar a little bit more and maybe get some more of those reps, and he did not. So this is a situation where, Georgia brought in some guys to help at quarterback, and, it didn't pan out, but it's tough to bring in guys who might be able to start when you have a guy that everyone in the country knows is going to start the entire season. I think that's the situation that Georgia was last season with Carson Beck, and kind of honestly, after seeing Gunnar Stockton in the Sugar Bowl, it's kind of where Georgia is right now, trying to, increase its competition at the quarterback position going into the spring. It's tough, and it's a situation where we said it's tough for them to tell other quarterbacks come in here when you have a quarterback about to start in the college football playoff. You didn't know how he's going to perform. I thought he performed well enough to where he's not locked in, but it's going to be probably tough to beat him out.
Totally agree. And that's going to make what Georgia does, if it does anything at quarterback, fascinating, because it's going to be a hard sell for any of these guys in the portal. We're going to take a quick break, come back and talk about the 9 Georgia players to this point who have announced that they are going pro. And then we'll talk a little UGA hoops. All right, Kip, help me out here if I have missed any of the names that we know as of Tuesday afternoon who have declared for the NFL draft. The list I've got is Carson Beck, Arian Smith, Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge, Michael Williams, Smile Munden, Jalen Walker, Malachi Starks. I don't believe center Jared Wilson has officially declared, but he did accept a invitation to the Senior Bowl, which seems to point toward he will be going pro. Any names that I missed in that rundown?
I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to navigate just completely new rules and situations where players are able to participate in a Senior Bowl as underclassmen, and so we're. I mean, do we even know as of now whether that completely locks them into declaring the you can opt out of the NFL draft, which kind of throws a whole nother wrinkle into it. So I think as of now, we're kind of just operating what if you're accepting an invite to the Senior Bowl, you are looking to enter the NFL draft. But I think there might be a path to returning, so we can't lock anything in. But I think that's the list as of right now. And like I said, with the transfer portal, a couple surprises on that list, in my opinion.
One guy I knew I was missing a guy. Warren Brinson was the other guy who has declared. And to your point about the Senior Bowl, my understanding, you can accept an invitation. If you go and participate, you're moving on. But if you decide to withdraw, which I think happened a couple years ago, was it Will Reichard, the Alabama kicker? Because Podlesny wound up filling in his spot. He decided he was coming back to Alabama. So yeah, let's get a rundown, Kip, of this list. Who has surprised you on it? What are your overall thoughts on the 9 guys to this point who have declared? 9 guys have declared, and then a 10th would be Jared Wilson, who has accepted that Senior Bowl invite.
Well, that last guy would be considered somewhat of a surprise. I do think if Jared Wilson does end up heading to the draft, him and Dylan Fairchild stick out as the biggest surprises just because they have eligibility, and I would not consider them to be first round or second round picks as of now. In my opinion, I think Dylan Fairchild probably, goes around the same as Tate Ratledge, which is say late third round, which again, it's life-changing money. But we have seen in the past players with similar grades that Kirby was able to convince to come back. I guess Tate Ratledge being one of those guys because he was probably considered around that last season as far as what kind of draft grade he got. And then with Jared Wilson, I thought he might be like a fourth round guy, but then I took a closer look at that center position and said he could easily be the first center taken in this draft. It just becomes a question of which team wants a center first. And I think that puts him probably in a similar situation where I don't think he goes in the first or second round, maybe early third. So yeah, those are situations where you see guys going to enter the draft early all the time that are taken in third round, but you also see plenty of guys come back to improve their stock, knowing you now have NIL, you can get, you can bridge the gap in salary there and maybe be a first, or second round pick and double that first contract income, in the NFL. So I would say those are 2 surprises and big time losses for Georgia.
Significant. I mean, this offensive line is going to look super different than it did in 2024. Yeah, there were some no brainers on here. Shout out to the folks on the Junkyard. Some of y'all had talked yourselves into Malachi Starks coming back, but I don't know if you remember this, Skip. I'm going to ask you. Remember, there were people like, "Hey, Brock Bowers, he may come back for another." Do you remember that last year? I swear it happened.
There was like a 48-hour period where they just talking about how much Brock loves Georgia. And yeah, I couldn't help but laugh because the guy was gonna be the first tight end taken. I thought he was gonna go in the top 10 at the time, and he's proven that he should have gone in the top 10 and set every single tight end record and some just receiver records in general. But yeah, that guy was a 3-and-out guy. You knew that the moment, Georgia's lined up and played its first football game, his freshman season in 2021, You knew like this is it. Like this guy is coming in and see ya. It's not a matter of whether or not he or financially needs that. I mean, that guy was just made for the NFL, and he's one of the best players to ever play at Georgia. So you knew you're only getting 3 seasons out of him, and the fact that he came in and got 2 national championships. I mean, like there was nothing else for him to prove at Georgia. So yeah, that one kind of made me laugh. But similarly with Malachi Starks, I mean, he's going to be the first safety off the board. Whether or not you thought he had that dynamic season at the safety position, he was highly productive for Georgia for 3 seasons and just checks off every box for an elite NFL safety as well. Kind of similar to Kyle Hamilton at Notre Dame.
Yeah, Malachi, Michael, and Jalen Walker, those are all no-brainers. To hit on some of the ones you had talked about, Dylan Fairchild, he was one we were talking before I started recording that, I thought initially he would leave. And then it was like I put too much thought into it. And I was like, well, he might kind of do the Tate Ratledge where he comes back for another year. He's a guy who grew up as a Georgia fan. And I think it was probably in his best interest to leave, especially when you consider one, look at what this line just lost. Two, we still don't know if Stacey Searles is going to be back next year. There's been no kind of explanation on what exactly is going to happen. So I can understand if you're in Dylan's position, hey, I'm going to go ahead and move on, get ready for the league. I'd say that the Jared Wilson thing, I think you hit on that position. The thing that I always give the benefit of the majority of Georgia players who are going into the draft is that they're going to test well, that they are going to go out there and test really well. And Kipp, was there anyone we heard more about in the offseason than Jared Wilson? Oh, this guy is freaky athletic. Kirby Smart's out here saying he's outrunning DBs. Still think that was a little bit of BS, but I still understand that he's super athletic for his position. So you go in there, you say, look, I was the starting center at Georgia for the majority of the year. He goes out, he tests well. Again, center's not a position where you're going to go very high off the board, but I think you're right, Kipp, that he's got a chance to say, to show I'm the top center prospect in this draft and wind up going fairly high because of it.
Yeah, and definitely maybe, I saw Georgia's secondary play this season. Maybe Kirby Smart wasn't BSing when he said Jared Wilson was outrunning some of those guys because they didn't actually – they didn't really fly the ball as well as they did in previous years. So that might have been our first red flag on an indictment on this Georgia defense from Kirby Smart. But I do, yeah. I look at the center class, and I'm not like putting the highest of stock on it. But even, Mel Kiper has Jared as his number 1 center right now. And so to some people who have made a living off covering the draft, Jared's already, atop his position. So I do think there's probably people in his camp that said, hey, if you're already considered the best at your position, go ahead and go to the NFL. And Kirby gets these guys their grades. I mean, this isn't a situation where, he's going to give them false information. So I think that probably Jared Wilson's grade came back. It may have been 3rd or 4th, but at the same time, knowing you're the best at your position means you can go into the Senior Bowl or the Combine, tear it up, and then, if you're the best at your position, it only takes one team to say, you know what, we need a starting center. And maybe he goes off, late 2nd round. And that may have been where he was going to go regardless if he came back next season. Like I said, we saw with Tate Ratledge a situation where he came back and he's probably going around the same place. So I think you made a great point. If Georgia is going to make any coaching changes, it will probably come next month. That's just me. That is an estimate on when we've seen these things happen in the past. I think those happened after the traditional signing day. That's when I think the contracts actually they may end at the end of February. I'm trying to remember when Georgia's contracts end, but I just think that's a situation where, as a player, not knowing who your position coach is or not knowing for sure who your position coach is going to be has to play a huge role if you're on the fence on something like that. So that makes sense when you think about that decision and knowing, again, if Jared's the first center off the board, then I don't think anyone can argue that he made the right decision to go to the draft.
To your point about the timing, I know for a fact that Mike Bobo was hired on Valentine's Day, 2023. So, I mean, the timing makes sense with what you're saying there, Kip. Now, there's still a few Georgia players who have not announced what they're doing. This is not a comprehensive list. There's other guys we're still waiting on. But to me, Kip, there are 3 names really worth paying attention to. And I'm going to let you hop in and tell me if you think there's more than that. Running back Trevor Etienne, cornerback Dalen Everett, and defensive lineman Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. Is there more than that? Those are the 3 that I'm really watching over these next few days.
I mean, those are definitely the biggest ones. I think I'd be surprised if we heard anyone else. I'm trying to think of anyone else who might, I really do feel that that's it. Oscar Delp. Oscar Delp is one who, again, it would be kind of a surprise if he entered the draft. But at the same time, knowing that position room continues to get restocked, nothing is guaranteed. This tight end class it's fairly deep. I don't think he would be one of the top 5 tight ends, at least heading into workouts. So I'd probably say that he's, a later pick, let's just say 5th round as of right now. So it kind of be a surprise. But I just said that's a guy that we're still going to watch to make sure that, he announces he come back. I mean, we've seen guys that we would even consider being draft hopefuls who still announce they're returning. On the flip side, I have to point out the fact that Georgia has gotten good news in that situation with Christian Miller. Knowing what they have on that defensive front, him coming back was huge. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, knowing that, again, they have basically 4 guys at each position right now. No, not really a lot of margin for error. That's a guy that they definitely need to get back. And yeah, I think Dalen Everett and Trevor Etienne, those are, key cogs on this Georgia team. And now that you've lost a couple guys that you maybe didn't expect, looking for leadership, those are definitely guys. I mean, the fact that Jalen Walker is leaving, Trevor Etienne, probably that next guy along with Tate Ratledge, you kind of look for leadership. So I do think that is a huge guy, regardless of, his role in Georgia's offense, which was a big one this season. But I do think they need him back for that locker room presence and for that accountability. Because now, that was a guy that did not have the strongest performance in his last game, in the college football playoff, his first taste of playoff, atmosphere experience. I think that's a situation where you could have him coming back and wanting to prove himself that he can make an impact in big time football games. So yeah, those are big decisions. And I think that's probably the key guys. Be surprised if anyone else, as far as the draft is concerned, announce their intentions to enter.
Dylan Bell was the only other name, but I don't know that it makes sense for him to go pro. I think he'd have to try to really lean on the Debo Samuel comp and try to get someone to pick him. But I think it's in his best interest to come back. I did want to give the opportunity for both of us, Kip, to give predictions on Trevor Etienne, Dalen Everett, and then Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. I'm going to say Trevor comes back. I am going to say I think the likelihood that he were to leave has gone up with this offensive line. These guys are moving on. I can see Trevor being like, it's not going to get any better next year. But my prediction is Georgia convinces him to come back with the hope that this offense is going to be better next year. Dalen Everett, I'm going to say he goes pro. I don't think he's one of the top corner prospects, but I think he's a guy kind of going back to what I talked about earlier with Jared Wilson, where I think he has the confidence, hey, I'm going to go test well. People see what Georgia has turned out as far as defensive backs in the NFL, and Dalen's going to go pro. And then I think they got to have TID back. I think whatever he wants, you give it to him. I'm going to say he does come back. Ty Ingram Dawkins, that's going to be a big one. I say that he comes back, and of these 3 guys left, I think Georgia brings back 2 of them, which I think would be significant. What do you think of these 3?
I think they're all coin flips right now. I mean, it's back and forth because they haven't made a decision yet. So if I were to project right now, I would give a slight lean. I would say Oscar Delp leaning towards coming back. The fact that, again, no decision made means no decision's been made, which means still considering going to NFL. ETN, I would say a slight lean, but also I've heard over and over again back and forth. And this is since the playoff ended. A lot of people talked about, well, let's see what he does in the playoff. And he didn't have the best performance, but it's gone back and forth with him. Everett, I would lean, he is going to come back. But again, I thought it was the exact opposite going into the playoff. TID, I think Ty is one where it's all hands on deck. They got to make sure they get him back. If he doesn't come back, I think Georgia's defensive front is in a world of hurt without a guy like that. I think he's going to be a guy that they expect a lot of this season. I have no idea where he would project in the draft. He is an enigma for me. So I still think it would be surprising if he entered the draft. He would have to really be leaning on his combine and pro day performances, because there are some very productive defensive linemen in this draft, and he was disruptive when he was on the field. I don't think he's put it all together yet. I think his best football is in front of him. So Georgia needs him back. I think they get him back, but the fact that these are all still basically coin flips, it is a pivotal time for Georgia's roster makeup right now.
Stay glued to Dawgs 24/7, because as we said, hell, there might have been news while we were sitting here recording this. It's a lot happening, especially for the start of the week. So stay glued to Dawgs247.com. Georgia men's basketball minute before we wrap up this episode. Tough start to SEC play for the Bulldogs on Saturday. Lost at number 24 Ole Miss 63-51. A game where Georgia just struggled significantly on offense. Shot 29% from the field, 2 of 18 from 3. They still managed to cut this thing to about a 2-point Ole Miss lead with roughly 6 minutes left in the game. Couldn't sustain it because they couldn't score, and Ole Miss pulls away and wins it. Tough loss to start, especially with what you have coming up on Tuesday night, hosting number 6 Kentucky, a Kentucky team that can shoot the lights out from 3, coming off a 106-100 home win over Florida. Kipp, I think we've talked about this in the past. This is a brutal start to SEC play for Georgia. Need to try to take advantage of these home games. I think they've got their work cut out for them against Kentucky. They play Oklahoma at home on Saturday. I think that's one you really got to have. It's the start of SEC play is not for the faint of heart when it comes to the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and that Mike White gave a great quote on that. I mean, he said another really good team, and how unique is it? We're going to be saying that for 18 straight, and he's right. That Ole Miss game was one Georgia needed to win. When we were looking back on the resume, like that was their, I'm not going to say their best chance, but that was just, when you're talking about a team that we thought they compared favorably to, when we talked about, man, is Georgia going to be ranked in top 25? This was kind of that comp game. I know it was on the road, but still, that was the one where you had to look, and they have to shoot better in a game like that. And defensively, they were struggling. You look at this Kentucky team. They got a pair of big men too. Amari Williams and Andrew Carr are going to really test Georgia. And I thought, Ace Newell, great first SEC game. They need more of that. But you're going to need some more from Somto. I mean, he only played 12 minutes against Ole Miss. That's not going to get it done. You're going to need him against these guys because they had 30 and 12, I think, in their win over Florida. So I think you're going to need to get a bigger contribution from Somto. You're going to need Asa to do just keep doing what he's been doing, and you're definitely going to have to make better use of your possessions because that was a struggle to see. They just, again, it was kind of like last year where they just went through those stretches where they were having to grind things out. And I think when you have these big men down there, they're helping to get you extra possessions. But if you're not getting it done defensively and your other big men's only playing 12 minutes, then it's not a recipe for success. So I do think Justin Abson, he filled in admirably, but I think you got to have your most talented players on the court when you're playing this SEC schedule.
Yeah, Santos struggled defensively, and I think that's a big reason why he wasn't on the floor for very much of that loss in Oxford. All right, Kip, before we get out of here, Atlanta Falcons in the season 8-9, disappointing loss to the Carolina Panthers to end the season, but they're picking number 15 overall. So you are our resident Atlanta Falcons fan, our resident draft expert. What are you wanting? Are there a few names that you like for the Falcons at number 15?
You already reprimanded me for putting the curse of the Falcons on Jalen Walker. I think he would be a great fit for the Falcons regardless, because we've talked about his presence in the locker room, the accountability that he would have on a Falcons defense that hasn't been accountable in the last decade. Hasn't been a top 20 defense. And again, I think that he would be an outstanding fit, but Tennessee edge, James Pierce. I think that's a guy that just checks off a lot of boxes. Georgia needs help at edge rusher. They, even with their improvements this season toward the end of the season, it still, was a situation where they gave up way too many third down conversions because they could not pressure the quarterback consistently. I think he's a guy that would help out Georgia a lot. Those are the two guys that make the most sense. I think Mykel Williams will be off the board. I think Malachi Starks would make a lot of sense, but I also think he probably goes to the Miami Dolphins at number 13. But if he's on the board at 15, Georgia should have – the Falcons should have no hesitation replacing, the whatever was left of Justin Simmons that we saw this season with Malachi Starks. So I think, those are all – outstanding fits for the Falcons. And so we know there's zero chance none of them will ever play for the Atlanta Falcons.
You made the mistake of saying the Falcons would draft a Georgia player, as the Junkyard would have let you know as soon as the words left your mouth.
I guess you could take solace in the fact that Georgia players deserve better.
We're going to end the podcast on that note. Thanks to Kipp for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to subscribe to Dawgs 24/7. This is proven to be about as busy a time of the year as we have because of draft decisions, because of what's going on in the portal. Go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok, all kinds of good content there. We're going to continue with the portal stories. I'm going to have some breakdowns on the newest additions as this week goes on. We'll have Georgia basketball coverage, especially with this big game Tuesday night at home against Kentucky. So we will end the podcast there. For Kipp Adams, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.